Hello everyone! Do you like archetypes? Of course you do! No is not an answer. After all, there have been all the talk of team building for the past 2 seasons. Well, most of it. So about 2 seasons ago, I made a video describing each archetype and their mechanisms, as well as their current status at the time. Having seen them evolve after each banner and each having received support over the months, I was thinking that it would be interesting to do a kind of report on those status archetypes, about what they got, and how teams are made around them. So we'll see those changes in details for each archetype at once. But first, I need to clarify a few things, because we tend to assume that the 7 main archetypes changed as time passed by getting support that corrected their flaws. However, they themselves haven't changed at all. Burn is still slow, proccing once per turn, Bleed is still inconsistent, Tremor still does nothing by itself, etc. What has changed is how units have been using them, either as support increasing the status efficiency or power, or as damage dealer benefiting from the status. I'll detail those later, but what that means is that most of the IDs still won't increase the power, some even really having trouble without help, like Poise IDs having trouble sustaining by themselves, like Rupture or Blade Lineage Sinclair needing support to be viable, or not. This means some IDs became mandatory if you want the archetype to work, and the flaws I mentioned in my first video are still real. But that also means that if you have these IDs, those might be reduced or even removed, and often their power might increase. But as I said, I'll get more into details for each archetype as we go on. Also, a reminder that while not tightly tied, there is a correlation between archetypes and sins, so finding them linked is very common, and I'll talk about them as well. Now let's go in order of sins, starting with Burn. During the 2 last seasons, Burn didn't receive much. 2 IDs and egos during season 3, and 2 more IDs this season during the Valpogesnacht. However, those 2 IDs ended up being core IDs for the archetype. Well, especially Magic Bullet Otis, with a unique status Dark Flame, allowing Burn to deal its damage multiple times per turn under the form of Pride damage. Meanwhile, Don Sinclair is a damage dealer with incredibly high damage potential in the archetype, but harder to play. Those 2 IDs are core, and will probably still be for a while. The other 2 IDs complete the Leo team, which are still the majority of Burn representation in the game. In fact, those 8 IDs are almost the only Burn IDs in the game, with the addition of N Sinclair still being a valid option if you don't have Don Sinclair and Pequod Ishmael. But with a limited infliction, I wouldn't consider putting her in a Burn team, outside niche cases or healing Don Sinclair's SP, especially since Leo Ishmael is a good unit. Ego-wise, the 2 new 9-2 aren't too relevant, since Faust still doesn't have a Burn ID and Don Sinclair doesn't really want to use Ego anyway, though Claire loves it for SP reduction. But Burn still has one of the most varied pool of Egos nonetheless, with really strong ones like Ishmael's Outer Blossom Star, Mersol's Capote, and obviously Ryoshu's Force Smash Flame. But right now the archetype mostly looks the same than before, with Dark Flame speeding it up. Regarding team building, it's pretty straightforward. All 3 stars are in, with Otis being the most important, because of Dark Flame, then in order Don Sinclair, Leo Rodion, and Leo Ishmael, or Claire instead. The first 2 make the archetype a lot more focused around Wrath, at least for some 1-turn bursts. Then for the last 2 slots, best choice is among the 4 Leos left, starting with Ryoshu, with their very strong egos. Last slot is between Mersault and Gregor, depending on your needs. I personally prefer Mersault for burn count on S3, as well as access to Capote and, well, Regret. Without Ego, Gregor is a better damage option, with good potency. Meanwhile, Onglu is better suited as a support to increase count inflection. Speaking of which, putting Rodion in first slot to benefit from it is a good idea. If you want to play Faust 9-2, you can put in Faust, who can also help Sinclair, and will help her as a support anyway. Talking about Sinclair, his Don ID really appreciates LCB Yisang's support, so it's also recommended. Then for the rest, well, there aren't any more burn support, so fill in with generally good supports, like LCB Don and Arclay for pierce damage for Rodion. Overall, the archetype didn't receive much support, so we will have to wait to diversify team building, and making it less reliant on Valpogesnacht to perform, though it is in a solid position with it. Talking about archetypes needing support, let's go on to Bleed. Unfortunately, unlike Burn, Bleed received a good amount of support during season 3 and 4, though in very particular forms. First, they tried to introduce a bunch of IDs doing both Poise and Bleed, also called Bloise, like Blastoise. But anyway, it didn't really work. Well, the thing is, you still need to work around Poise to inflict bleed, and Poise itself already needs support, so it's kinda weird. But for bleed, there are quite good supports if you can crit. Twin Hook Gregor inflicts a lot of potency, and Pequod's Cliff can inflict up to 10 bleed count with skill 2. Red Plum Blossom can also have a good potential in those cases as well. But well, those conditions not being easy to fulfill, outside of otherwise good ideas, they are not helping an already inconsistent archetype too much. Outside of those, Bleed also received 4 other IDs, 2 of the middle and 2 from the ring. Middle IDs aren't too good at it though, only inflicting average potency from the skills and most of all, not benefiting from it at all, preferring to be based around envy instead. Ring IDs however, they enjoy Bleed very much, but not only, as they are also based on the accumulation of statuses, which is great for IDs like N-Corp, who they synergize very well with. Last, Ryoshu recently got Red Eyes and Penitence from Walpurgis, which is a really good Bleed support to inflict missing potency. Ego-wise, Bleed finally got some of its first actual Bleed Egos, with 4 of them, including 2 Valves. Though they all have additional uses, like Damage or Tremor, and the most valuable one is Sanguine Desire, which is extremely good for Bleed, I guess. Because the thing is, while Rodion has 3 IDs based on Bleed, they are all pretty bad compared to other IDs, making it awkward to use her in a Bleed team when she should be right at the center. The archetype has pretty much the same problems than before unfortunately, mostly being inconsistent because reliant on enemies' coins, and either consuming too much to keep it going, or not enough for it to be relevant. So regarding team building, we technically have a lot of tools and factions to choose from. Pequod, N-Corp, Kurokumo, Ring, Middle, and even some Blade Lineage and some others. In practice, well, the main problem is still Bleed itself and the inconsistent payoff. In Mirror Dungeons, Ego gifts are so strong that you don't care, but otherwise it's trickier. The strongest idea is still Ring Sang though, not only being strong overall, but being able to inflict very good amounts of bleed count, as well as benefiting from it. It lacks a bit of support for negative statuses, but then Faust is also a very good idea to support him, as well as inflicting nails, which is still a good source of bleed count as well. Probably also Core now, the new Ryoshu ID is very good at inflicting potency, which is what the archetype needs, though it is limited to Walpurgis. Outside those, Okofi Songlu might be one of the first choices for having both good potency and count, but then I think it's up to you on who you want to bring. However, here are some recommendations. First of all, bringing any of these IDs is madness, as they either do not work well, do very little, or even are anti-synergistic. However, some of them have very good support. Kurokumo Ryoshu and Arcor Salt have very good bleed count infliction if you need it, especially the latter, while with some Poise build up, Twin Hook Gregor has very good potency infliction as well. And last, if you still haven't completed the team, bringing the Pequod duo can be a good way to round up the team, as they somewhat both help and benefit from it. Personally, I like to bring Endon for good additional nails infliction with Faust, with Encliffe as support for it. Overall, despite the support, the archetype is still pretty inconsistent, and would need a better payoff like Sanguine Desire to profit a lot more, but on a better ID. So now we're getting into Tremor, and that's juicy territory. Starting the end of Season 3, they decided to rework the direction for the archetype, and created a new mechanic around it, Amplitude Conversion, and its sibling, Amplitude Entanglement, which convert Tremor into one of its variants, and fuse multiple of them for one turn with Entanglement. Since then, we are able to convert Tremor into 5 of its variants, with different effects. Ophi first introduced it with Decay, reducing defense level by a large amount, then Otis binds with Fracture, increasing stagger levels, effectively increasing the physical weaknesses from it, which both allow Tremor to increase the damage on its targets. Then both Onglu's Ego Cavernous Wailing and his Euro DVID introduced Reverb, the Golden Child, dealing sloth damage on Tremor bursts. This with Everlasting Faust entangling it into Everlasting, which has a chance of doubling or tripling Tremor bursts on top of inflicting a lot of burst count and potency, allowed for insane one-turn combos that destroyed enemies. This, coupled with T-Corp IDs and their moratorium shortly after, just amplified it further. She's also able to convert into Chains, which reduces clash power. Other than that, the archetype received some other IDs and Egos with situational uses, especially Ryoshu being and having good support. Overall, the archetype now has 2 possibilities, inflicting more damage with Decay or Fracture, or killing the enemy with reverb combos. You might understand that the latter is overall preferred for now, at least for bosses. Not playing any of them though is pretty much shooting yourself in the foot. So for this one, Onglu is core, either is Euro DVID or Cavernous Wailing Ego. The Ego is overall better, as it doesn't last only one turn, can be used anytime and has 3 attack weight, but having both is obviously the best. Then we got Faust, another of our Purges unit, is also core pick with Air Everlasting Ego. If you want the full version with Time Moratorium, one of the 2 T-Corp IDs are great, Dom being overall stronger, but it's easier to set up with Trojan, who also doesn't convert Tremor into Chain, which you might not want. After that, this card still makes Mola Otis one of the strongest IDs in the game, and is a very recommended pick. Then at this point, you have options for each sinner, and will probably depend on the type of content. LCCB Ishmael still has insane 16-8 Tremor Infliction, but Ammo makes her less relevant in prolonged fights. Orpheus Cleave benefits from it as well as inflict good potency, but Decay might mess up your combo. He and Ishmael also both like Sloth for Everlasting. Rose Spawner Mersault with Regret can be a really strong option, as well as Yurosho's Rio Divi. In any case, those IDs should be in support anyway. In fact, just do it for every other sinners. Except Gregor, I guess, still on kneeling duty. If you don't want to use Reverb, Decay is still a valid option around Eastcliff, but IDs won't change too much. As for Egos, even if Everlasting takes care of count for bosses, Rodian's Effervescent Corrosion still has a high count infliction, reinforcing T-Corp Rodian. I have trouble recommending Rose Spawner due to her passive messing up her own charge. Otis Binds with Fracture can be really strong to clean waves of enemies faster as well. Overall, the archetype got a unique identity with the latest additions, making it more into a combo archetype, which I like a lot. This brought it up from one of the worst to one of the best archetypes due to its capacity of insane damage with Reverb. But well, that's only if you play Reverb. Also, Reverb and Moratorium are completely tied to Sloth, making them even more powerful against Sloth weak enemies, but also way less efficient if they resist it. It doesn't really impact team building though, as you don't need IDs dealing Sloth damage for that. Now let's talk about Rupture. So, in 2 seasons, Rupture received 1 ID and 1 Ego. And a half, I guess. But I wouldn't really call Otis Dimension Shredder Rupture Ego. Same for Garden of Thorns, which only has a passive. Some IDs do inflict some, but that's not enough to be included. So Dead Rabbit Mersault is the only thing we got, which is an okay support, at least it can clash. Though the status recently had a new addition with a new Deviat faction for Rodian. She isn't as much as a support for it, than getting benefit from it though, but at least her ratios are mostly neutral in the right conditions. So as for how you build Rupture, well, it hasn't changed for 2 seasons. What you're searching for when building Rupture is IDs able to hit without consuming too much count. W Copy Sang still has one of the best count infliction with his Dimension Shredder Ego, and should be included in any team wanting to capitalize from the status. Next choices will be 7 Faust, who still has good benefit from it, as well as maintaining count from clashing, and then Lantern Dawn, who is not only a really good tank, but also has neutral to positive count ratios on all her skills. For bosses, Talisman Sinclair's setup probably still has the best ramp up mechanic of any archetype. After that, 7 Eastcliff also has very good additional potency infliction with his passive, especially on skill 1. Deviat Rodian is able to capitalize on Rupture quite a bit and can be included, however both K-Corp Onglu and 7 Otis can also be brought in, not only for their Rupture synergy, but for respectively Dimension Shredder and Ebony Stem, which are very good egos for Rupture, especially Otis. Gregor's AEDD is also very good to help maintaining count if properly played, and can be used with his Rose Spawner ID. I'd like to mention another way of playing Rupture though, with Talisman Sinclair mostly, which is not by building up Rupture, but having it consistently applied for conditionals of IDs without good infliction, like Jacob Gregor, though this type of play doesn't snowball, having a limited payoff. Funnily enough, there are more IDs having Rupture, and they aren't really good at inflicting or benefiting from it, but they often have very good support for infliction, like 7 Ryoshu or W Corp Mersault if you want more infliction rather than Dead Rabbit support. Overall, even the archetype didn't receive much support, its capacity to shred bosses regardless of their resistance is still barely matched, even with the new Tremor. But talking about shredding bosses, let's sink in sinking. So as you might know, Season 4 was the season of sinking, and the season it was. From having only 2 DHE IDs in Season 3, which is still more than some others to be honest, It got 7 IDs and 4 egos this season. And 2 orbs. No, this doesn't work. So Sinking got 3 DHE IDs, which are starting to make a discard comp with Mersault, but they have been outclassed in terms of sinking. Well, Yisang definitely. But Mersault and Onglu are by no means bad, and the last one can still be included in the stronger teams. But the whole faction of Wuthering Heights is really good, with Echoes of the Manor able to help tremendously with count, Otis having very good clashes and SP gain, Faust good SP support, Iscleve very strong payoff from it, Grigor as well. We also got 2 egos to help, even if the kind of help is not on building up count. And last but not least, Spicebush got a strong competitor in the presence of Solemn Lament. 4 egos, outside of Solemn Lament being good as a finisher, Bygone Days have more utility and support, though Yisang's is probably the most useful, to him at least. All of this on top of an already good support made Sinking an archetype good not only for bosses, but also in other fights, as reducing enemies' SP to prevent them from rolling heads is very comfortable, and so is Panic when you can inflict it. So now, how do you build Sinking? Well, first you need a Yisang, so pick your choice. You might spot an intruder in this list, so let's remove it. As for who is better between Spicebush and Lament, well, that's a whole discussion. The theory is that Butterfly will just add damage to enemies without sanity, and therefore has more value. Against enemies with sanity, well, you inflict Butterfly very early, so you begin capitalizing on its damage from the start, which include a lot of sinkings that will not be included in the calculation for Sinking Deluge because it requires longer setup for a full payoff, so depending on the speed of your setup, Sinking Deluge will have a huge result, but if it's too slow, all the damage you could have gotten with Butterfly from the count hidden might outvalue your entire sinking setup, so overall Butterfly might actually have better results while also being easier to use. You got everything? Well, basically, both are good, but Lament Yisang is easier to play. Both are still a fundamental piece of the core, with Mola Ishmael and Yeti following, the first one for a very good count infliction, especially with passive, as well as the new Bygone Days, and the second for his strength in general, and Rhyme Shank, which is still the best sinking ego in the game, and one of the best ego period. After that, like for Rupture, you would want IDs able to maintain the count more easily. Best IDs include Butler Otis, as I said earlier, especially for Echoes of the Manor, with Faust as a cheap alternative, addition, or even support. Heya Gregor is also one of the best choices for supporting this status, especially with its ego additions. Yeti Onglu is then a valid option, then followed by Mersault. Finally, somewhere amidst this crew lies Wild Hunter's Cliff, whose count infliction isn't too great, but is one of the best IDs in the game and capitalized from sinking. And Faust passive. I have to mention that while the archetype did receive a lot of stuff, not all sinners have an ID for it, and passive supports are limited, so the rest of the bench should be filled up with generally good IDs. So overall, the archetype is one of the easier to use and capitalize from in any conditions, making it one of the best at the moment. It is still entirely tied to Gloom damage though, so efficiency will be mitigated against enemies resistant to it. Now let's get on to the selfish archetypes, with Poise first. So, about Poise. Only 2 IDs and 1 ego were added for it during Season 4, most of the support it received being located in Season 3. Those are pretty good though, with Ryoshio being a really good generalist, able to sustain herself mostly. But Season 3 was the Poise season, where it received a bunch of stuff. Pickwood IDs, Sank IDs, as well as 2 other ammo IDs, bringing Poise back into the front of the scene with IDs generally good, despite having Poise. For, well, most of them benefit from it, but couldn't maintain it for their own life, save for a few exceptions, and some don't even care about it. Did you know that Magic Bullet Otis has Poise in her passive? But well, she doesn't care, and so does 7 Faust. But what this season brought was the infamous new Blade Lineage IDs, and especially BL Mersault, one of the most broken units in the game. Imagine being able to make BL Otis relevant again. Yes, quite a feat. The archetype also received Blind Obsession egos for Poise, but they don't really bring too much to the table, being too random or selfish, somehow probably bringing more to charge. Also, Dawn's Wishing Can is Poise related, kinda. But anyway, what's important to understand is that unlike other statuses, Poise is selfish. You don't build an archetype from your units onto a target, each of your units build it for themselves. This could change with the addition of statuses increasing Poise for everyone, but for now it is not the case. However, some IDs supporting others' Poise were introduced, making it possible to build Poise teams with synergy between units. Unfortunately, they are mostly very limited and don't bring enough by themselves. But there is one exception, all because of Blade Lineage Mersault. This guy has the ability to support an entire team of Blade Lineage members, but only Blade Lineage members. So if you want to build a Poise team, outside MD at least, the most relevant one is the Blade Lineage one. You either bring all of them, as you have more bonuses if you have the whole crew, or only a base core of 2 or 3 IDs. Those must obviously include Mersault, and then the most relevant one is Yisang for having the highest payoff otherwise. Then it kinda depends, Dawn for support is good, or one of the other 2-3 stars. Unless you have no other choice, bringing Otis is madness, and not Sparta. What is important for Blade Lineage comps is having enough pride to be able to activate Mersault's passive as many times as possible. But as I said, otherwise, Poise is selfish, and IDs mostly serve as individually good IDs for other types of teams. But if you want a full team for like Mirror Dungeon, the BL core is still insanely good, but then some IDs that complement it well are the Quad Duo of 3 stars, or Trio if it's Mirror Dungeon. Ryoshu is excellent, but the support is so good you might want it. Both Sank IDs can also be included, Sinclair for its strength and clash, and Otis if you want a tank. There are other IDs with Poise available, but unfortunately, using them is barely worth it, especially older ones, as they are either not relevant anymore, or just barely working due to Poise workings. So even if the archetype did receive strong individual IDs, it didn't help most older ones becoming relevant, except Blade Lineage, which is the only real Poise team you can use effectively outside MD. Stuff like Red Plum Blossom seems interesting, but is way too hard to benefit from right now. In the same ways, most Poise egos aren't relevant right now outside of general use like Blind Obsession, or benefiting the user, like Fellblade helping pick what is. Poise IDs have one benefit over other archetypes though, which is they build up their status on themselves, so they are technically more suited to fights with multiple targets, especially regular encounters or fights with waves. And if they keep making chain battles like they did with Raid Wave 4 or the Murder on the Warp Express Kanto, they will become even more relevant, like the last status on the list. I'm obviously talking about Curse! We got 2 egos! Let's go! I'm obviously talking about Charge. And like Rupture and Burn, this one got very few things until very recently, though the few things they've gotten are pretty relevant. From 0 IDs in Season 3, they got 4 new ones in the last few months, with 3 of them working around the new added Charge potency, which is the only somewhat rework they did for any archetype, though it still requires a passive for it to be existent and relevant, for now at least, so it's not really a rework in itself. But anyway, 5 Charged egos were also introduced for the status, the 2 Blind Obsessions being not too relevant, but Dimension Shredder being a really good one for Otis, and in between, Electric Screaming, with the damage and the support version having their uses. What's interesting with the new additions is that both Otis and Heathcliff brought actual supports to the archetype, with the existence of load increasing charge consuming skills, as well as more consistent charge by ear, and photoelectricity increasing attackers' charge count. This helps Charge having actual synergy, especially with W Otis, making W Corp the first faction to break the 6-member threshold, who also had synergy with them. Like for Poise, Charge IDs are selfish IDs overall and can be included in any team with full utility, also having way less trouble with the status, though those new additions bring more advantages to using full charge teams, somewhat replacing Dawn's telepole in terms of utility. And let's be honest, those 2 bring more to Charge than Captain Ishmael will ever do to Poise, though they obviously can't reach the level of God Salt. In terms of teams that you can do, well, bringing a 6W Corp team is valid, but Otis doesn't bring enough support to make it the best team in my opinion. In this archetype more than in others, separating support and damage is important. So Otis and Heathcliff are very good support that you might want in most teams, though regarding Multicroc Heathcliff, his support is pretty unique and can help set up some niche situations requiring more charge count, like Faust's Consumption or Dawn's Electric Screaming. For damage dealers, the new Multicroc Faust is probably one of the 3 best IDs you can bring. Number 1 and 2 are both occupied by Ryoshu, who has to choose between 2 IDs now. Several factors separate them, like scenes, the length of fight, burst, payoff, counter, etc., but rule of thumb is that W Ryoshu has stronger short bursts, while Red Eye's Penitence is better in general in multiple domains. To this core, W Dawn is still one of the best choices to add, and then it's up to you for the remaining IDs. Our corp IDs aren't too relevant right now for Charge, outside Ishmael's, though Heathcliff still has very strong support with skill 3. To get more support and gluttony scenes, W Sang and Onglu are more interesting. Rose Spawners? What Rose Spawners? They don't exist, they can't hurt you. Egos aren't too important for Charge now, but it can use telepoles and Electric Screaming for damage and setups, Dawn being the best user for both. But overall, charge is still all about damage and not much more, so it's mostly a question of how you can just crush your opponents harder. We'll have to see if they bring more synergy for it later down the line, especially with Archetypes for example. So that concludes this report for the current status of the 7 main archetypes. Which one do you think won the most from the past seasons? I think Tremor is the biggest winner overall, just being able to work already, and then it be sinking. But at least, all archetypes got someone enhanced. While there might be almost no stuff for some of them in a season, they seem to be trying to bring better synergy for all of them. In fact, I'd argue they have been doing that almost slightly too much. Every time an idea releases, the first question is, which archetype will it support? They did try new stuff during Season 3 with Envy and kinda Pride, though Pride was still very linked to Poise, but that was very early on and didn't happen much during the whole of Season 4. However, some ideas and egos kind of disassociate from that, finding their conditionals elsewhere, like Ring's accumulation of statuses, or more focused on other things, like Ishmael's Wing Beat, more recognized for his single target damage than her beat in fiction, even if it's quite a bit. At the same time, they seem to have taken a few decisions on the ID's design. The first being 2 stars being really based around supporting the archetypes in an efficient way, most of the time. Then their designs for 3 stars to either really benefit from it, or bringing an entirely unique type of mechanic made for really interesting ones over the course of the last 2 seasons. I don't know if it's concerning in terms of power creep, but it's hard to say that any idea this last season was bad. So we'll have to see if they continue on this direction, which might make archetypes even more unique and work in a different way, which would be a good thing for Bleed for example. But well, talking about Bleed, it might not be too long before we actually get it. And that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Final message, the season's review will probably be the next and last video of the season. But then I might start working on a more general video on team building, which is something I didn't really enter into details too much. But subscribe and check the community tab for more news. In any case, see you next time and keep your sanity high in this slow descent into the inferno.